For those of you who joined together, and I joined together with you in your Zoom after last Sunday's worship, now you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong. I think someone said, "Are you going to sing to us, Andrew?" Now I think it was on the Zoom after worship, but it might have been a figment of my imagination and wishful thinking in a dream that I had this week. Anyway, here goes. This is my question to you at the beginning of this sermon. Will your anchor hold in the storms of life? Well, will your anchor hold in the storms of life? I'm sure you'll agree with me, we live in very strange times. I can't imagine, I can't remember anything as strange and as challenging as the last few months that we've had during the COVID pandemic. I wonder, how has it affected you? And how are you coping? It's almost that this pandemic has changed the whole world. Things will never be the same again. Sometimes we talk about getting back to normal, but I'm not sure that we'll ever get back to the normal as it used to be, and that may be a good thing. We've been locked in. We've been worried about ourselves. We've been worried about catching the virus. We've been worried about our family and our friends. We've been concerned about whether the authorities are going to get this virus under control. We've been really praying hard for friends and family who have been in hospital or in care homes. It's been a very scary time. It's been a really difficult time for many, many people. And little things that we never thought about before. How are we going to get some food? We're supposed to be locked in, and are we going to venture out and go to the supermarket and get something to eat? Well, you can probably tell by looking at me that I've not gone hungry during all this lockdown. I think there's another important aspect to us experiencing this strange experience. It's affected us physically. I mean, I've really enjoyed and been able to go down for a short walk, maybe an hour, very close to where we live, and it's been beautiful, and I've really enjoyed it. Sometimes we feel down, and I'm sure many of you do, and then other times things lift us up. It's been a bit of a roller coaster, emotionally and mentally. And then, of course, many conversations with our friends. Are we going to be able to get back and be living in our community? And particularly, what about our church? Are we going to get back and meet with our church friends who we've not seen for so long? And then we too have been we've really enjoyed getting to know our neighbours much more. We've sat on really lovely days, particularly on Sunday afternoon, sometimes Saturdays. We've sat at the end of our drives and we've talked to each other, and we've done quizzes and puzzles, and we've had a great time. We've really got to know our neighbours much more than we did before, and some of them are grappling with really significant issues. They've been working from home, all of them, most of them, not quite all of them. We have a couple of NHS and frontline workers who are neighbours very close to us. Some of our younger neighbours have been homeschooling their children and then expressing real concern in some instances about losing their jobs and how will they cope financially in the future. And I think for all of us, as we've gone through this strange period together, we have been thinking, well, what's next? What's going to happen next? What's the future hold for us? What's your story over the last few months? I'm sure all of you watching today have all your own experiences, which it would be good to have to share sometimes and learn how you've coped with it. Certainly it's been very strange to be shut in. And as I've hinted already, for me, it's been a time of complex emotions, sometimes very confusing emotions. At the beginning, when all this happened, we were really scared. As we were watching what was happening in China and then in other parts of the Far East, and then in Italy and Spain, and then in our own country, watching how the virus was spreading. At first, I was fascinated and watched all the news bulletins and the government briefings and endless discussions about will the NHS cope, what's going to be the effect on the NHS staff, have we got enough PPE, we aren't going to wear masks because they don't make any difference, and then some months later saying you mustn't go out unless you've got a mask on. Loads of really difficult issues. We've still got them. Is test and trace really working? What are the real statistics? Loads of different issues. What effect is it having on our economy, and what is the future state of the finances of the nation going to be? So very, very mixed feelings. As I say, it's a roller coaster. Sometimes we've been up and high, and sometimes we've been down, and we've been fearful. We've worried. Sometimes we've been sad. We've watched a number of our friends and their funerals on Zoom, and it's been really strange. Sometimes I get really frustrated and a bit angry with the government, but maybe I'm not the only one. There's so much uncertainty. But then on the other side, I just reflect on how much I have to be thankful for. My wife, my family, my friends were blessed with a really lovely home thanks to the National Methodist Housing Society, a lovely home and garden, and we've had some great fun. We've had some really good times. I remember the first act of worship on Zoom we went to. It took 20 minutes. It was a district one. There was 90 some people went on, and most of the time it was we could hear people saying, "Can they hear me? I can't hear anything. Have I pressed the right button?" And we were looking at their ceiling or looking at the wall or whatever. That's another thing that has really been interesting, hasn't it? During this time, we've been very nosy, looking and watching into people's homes, and I'd sometimes go really thought and think, what are they reading? What are those books on their bookshelf? And one time, we love breakfast telly on BBC, and there's a reporter there called Hugh Tim. He's the health reporter, and we would regularly have daily bulletins from him from his study. And I remember one day having a real good laugh because I was listening to what he was saying, and Susie was looking at his study, and then suddenly she said, "The globe's gone. The globe that he usually has on top of the bookcase, it's gone." Oh, by the way, just have a look up here. I know you'll be looking. I know it's a distraction from the sermon, but we've got a beautiful painting on the wall, and it's a painting of puppies in a stable. And it reminds us very much of the fact how Susie and I, we've only ever had one dog called Beauty. She was black, and she looked like those puppies. And some really good farmer friends of ours introduced her to us, and she was in a stable in straw. And so it reminds us of our dog. We've had some great funs. We've had some really funny times, and we've made some new friendships with our neighbours. And there's been loads of laughter and loads of funny things, unbelievable. I haven't got time to tell you about many more. I think too this has been a time where we've been greatly inspired. We've been inspired by people's stories, by the people who work in the NHS, by being inspired by seeing the conditions, inspired in a strange sort of way by the families of people who've been taken into intensive care and the pain and the suffering and the sadness. We've been inspired by joining. We all went out in our close to clap every Thursday at 8 o'clock for the National Health and frontline workers. It's been inspiring. And also those people who've been raising money. Some children, a little lad who has artificial legs, raising so much money for the NHS. And then, of course, there's the famous Captain Sir Tom. So inspiring. However, it's been a very, very challenging time. And in a sense, I think it has been, for us, for our nation, and in fact for the whole world, it's been an experience almost of being in a storm like we've never been in before. And perhaps as Christians, we've been wrestling with living through this storm and asking ourselves profound questions like, what on earth is God up to? What's he doing? And where's Jesus in all this? And then, what's the future of the church? What are we going to be able to do in the new era that will, once this is over, which could be a long time yet, what will church life be like? And what will its part that it can play in our lives? I want us to think a little bit now and draw on perhaps some things in that story that Susie read about Jesus walking on the water. Let's think about that and what God's saying to us in our storms, in our situation, to help us. I mentioned earlier that Jesus had just fed the 5,000 people and had been speaking all day, and I imagine it was tea time, and of course the crowds were fed. And then Jesus said to his disciples, you get in the boat, I'm going up into the hills to pray. And he sent them off in the boat onto the lake. Now in normal circumstances, the lake is about 5 miles wide, and it would probably take a couple of hours rowing with some good strong rowers. But it's renowned for sudden storms arising and peculiar winds off the hills. And this is what happened in this situation. The wind and the waves start blowing, and the disciples are in the boat, and they find themselves in a storm, a terrible storm. And although quite a number of them were fishermen, it was still a very scary, frightening experience. And we read about the storm continued, and it was in the second quarter, that's between 3 and 6 o'clock in the morning, that eventually Jesus walked on the water towards them. I want you to think for a moment what those disciples, how they were feeling and what they were like. I'm sure they were absolutely worn out and exhausted. I think they'd be soaked to the skin, and they'd be very, very afraid as to, in fact, maybe whether they were going to survive. And you can almost imagine them saying, anybody would know where Jesus is when we need him. Where is he? Where's he gone? Anyway, we read, in the morning Jesus came to them on the water. And when they saw him, they thought it was a ghost. They thought they were seeing things. And eventually Jesus shouts to them, courage! It is I. Do not be afraid. And then Peter says, Lord, can I walk on the water? And Jesus says, well, come. And he does so. Peter sets off, steps out of the boat, gets out of the boat. But then he starts looking and realizing how big the waves are and how much the wind is blowing, and begins to sink. And Jesus grabs hold of him, and they get in the boat together, and then the wind drops. And then as they get to the shore, the disciples just say to Jesus, truly, you are the Son of God. I want us to remember that in the storms of life, we are not alone. Those disciples shouted out to Jesus, "Lord, save us! Save us!" Peter said, "Save me, Lord, I'm drowning." And Jesus comes up when we're feeling maybe overwhelmed by all that's happening to us. And he says to you and to me, have courage, have faith. We might say, "Lord, save us, save us." And he says, have faith, and he saves us. As I think about this story of Jesus walking on the water, I'm reminded of another story, of an experience of one of the greatest theologians of all times. On the 14th of October, 1735, aged 32 years, John Wesley, accompanied by his brother Charles and quite a number of other friends, boarded the sailing ship Simmons at Gravesend and then set sail for America. It was quite a journey. I don't know whether it was 3 weeks or more, I forget now. But a terrible storm hit this ship, and the mainsail was split in two. This storm lasted a few days. The mainsail was split in two, and huge waves poured into the vessel, John Wesley recalls. And there was a few hundred English settlers on this boat, and they were screaming and panicking and shouting. But also on the boat were a small handful of German Christians called Moravians. They were not panicking and they were not screaming and shouting. They remained calm. They were praying together and they were singing hymns. They continued to pray and sing until the storm had passed. And John Wesley said, and said many times, that their example of trust and faith in God had had a profound effect upon him. Battered by storms. I imagine that when Paul decided to write his letter to the Thessalonian church, they too were feeling battered by storms. They were continually persecuted. And Paul encourages them by saying to them, "Be joyful always, pray at all times, be thankful in all circumstances, for this is the will of God in Jesus for you." So friends, when you feel perhaps battered and overwhelmed by the storms of life, when you can't see the way forward, when you struggle with all that's happening, and when you wonder about what the future holds and what it's going to be like and what's going to happen next, then cry out to Jesus for help. He promises always to be with us. And pray at all times. Be joyful and thankful. We have so much in our lives to be thankful for. Remember, our future and the future of our church family is in God's hands. So, will your anchor hold through the storms of life? Well, remember this. We have an anchor that keeps the soul steadfast and sure while the billows roll, fastened to the rock which cannot move, grounded firm and deep in the Saviour's love. Amen. And now I'm sure that most of you could not listen to that and think, oh, are we going to sing it? Well, of course we are. So I would like you now to try and find Will Your Anchor Hold on YouTube, and we'll sing it together.